The first scream came through my radio at 4:47 a.m., right as I was coupling engine 2401 to a string of grain hoppers. Static, then Tommy's voice, high and wrong, shouting about something in the dispatch office. Just dead air and the hum of diesel engines idling across the switching yard. I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, one hand still on the coupling lever, watching the distant glow of the office windows. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, then I saw shapes moving inside. Too many, too fast, wrong angles and jerking motions like broken puppets. That's when I heard the glass shatter. I didn't run toward the sound. 23 years working for Great Northern Rail taught me to trust my gut, and my gut was screaming to get the hell away from that building. I climbed into 2401's cab, locked both doors, and grabbed the radio. Tried every channel. Nothing but static on the yard frequency. Nothing on the main line. Nothing on emergency. Through the windshield, I watched the office door burst open. What came out used to be Tommy and maybe 3 others from the night shift. They moved like animals, heads low, running on all fours sometimes, then upright, then down again. Moonlight caught their faces, blood, so much blood, and their eyes reflected light like a dog's eyes do, that weird shine that shouldn't be there. The overhead lights across the yard started going dark, section by section, like something was killing the power grid systematically. I fired up 2401's engine, felt the familiar rumble beneath my feet. The cab lights illuminated my control panel, and I realized with cold clarity that I was sitting in 50 tons of steel with its own power source, surrounded by hundreds of rail cars and locomotives, connected to thousands of miles of track leading everywhere and nowhere. The things that used to be my co-workers were spreading out across the yard now, moving between rail cars, hunting. One of them, couldn't tell who anymore, climbed onto a tanker car 50 yards away and screamed, not a human sound. The answer came from the neighborhood beyond the fence, dozens of voices screaming back. I had maybe 10 minutes before they figured out where I was. The yard stretched out in front of me like a steel maze, 43 tracks, over 200 rail cars in various states of assembly, 3 other locomotives besides mine, maintenance buildings, fuel depots, and the dispatch tower. Everything I needed to survive was here. Everything I needed to die was closing in. My hands moved automatically, releasing brakes, checking pressure gauges, calculating. Not how to escape, how to fortify. Right now, if you've ever had to choose between running towards safety and building something worth surviving for, you'll understand what happened next. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this decision changed everything. I threw 2401 into reverse and started backing away from the office complex, moving slowly. Lights off, using just the ambient glow from the few remaining security lights. Railroad yards aren't designed for quick movements. Everything's calculated in tons and inertia and stopping distances measured in football fields. But I'd spent 2 decades learning every inch of this facility, every switch point, every siding, every dead-end track. The creatures, I couldn't call them people anymore, were spreading through the yard randomly. No coordination, just instinct, pulling them toward movement and sound. I kept the engine barely above idle, creeping backward past the intermodal terminal where triple-stacked containers loomed like apartment buildings. The radio crackled. Anyone copy this is Station 7 we have. Static. Then another voice, different frequency. Infrastructure is compromised. Military advises. Gone. I cycled through every channel, piecing together fragments. Outbreak. Infection. Bites. Fluid contact, 40-minute incubation, no cure. Shoot the head. Standard zombie playbook, except this was real and happening, and I could smell smoke on the wind from the direction of downtown. I stopped at track 31, killed the engine, sat in darkness listening. The creatures were hitting the fence line now, trying to climb the chain-link barriers that separated the yard from the residential areas beyond. More were coming. I could hear them, shuffling, scraping, that awful wet breathing sound. My yard, my domain for 23 years, was about to become ground zero for whatever hell was spreading through the city. But I had advantages they didn't understand. Rail cars are steel boxes. Locomotives are mobile power plants generating enough electricity to run a small town. The yard had its own fuel depot, 40,000 gallons of diesel, plus the personal tanks on every locomotive. The maintenance building held tools, welding equipment, spare parts, everything needed to keep a fleet running. And, most importantly, I had track. Miles of it, stretching out past the city limits, through farmland and forest, connecting to the national rail network like veins in a body. I spent the next 3 hours moving through the yard like a ghost, coupling cars together with desperate precision. Found a military transport train that had been sitting on track 12 for 2 weeks waiting for clearance, 8 flat cars loaded with equipment under heavy tarps. Coupled those to 2401. Added 2 boxcars from the automotive shipment on track 19. Empty. Cleared out. Perfect for storage. Found 3 passenger cars that had been mothballed since the commuter line shut down in 09. Gutted interiors but solid frames. Attached those. A maintenance car with a crane boom. 2 grain hoppers I could use for water storage. A refrigerated car from the produce run that still had battery backup. The sun came up while I was working, and that's when I saw the real scope of it. The city skyline 3 miles away was burning in a dozen places. The highway overpass that crossed the yard's eastern boundary was packed with abandoned cars, and between them moved hundreds of those things, drawn by the bottleneck, climbing over vehicles, pulling drivers through windows. The screaming reached me even over the idling engines. 3 of them spotted me while I was coupling the passenger cars. They came at me across the tracks fast and low, and I barely made it into 2401's cab before they reached the ladder. They threw themselves against the steel, fingers scrabbling at the windows, leaving bloody smears. I sat there breathing hard, watching them, and saw what Tommy must have seen in the office. Their eyes were still human enough to show hunger, but nothing else. No recognition, no reasoning, just need. I throttled up and started moving, dragging my assembled train through a complex series of switch points toward the maintenance facility. The creatures fell away, couldn't keep pace with 25 miles per hour, and by the time I reached the fuel depot, I'd lost them. Backed my train onto the servicing track and started the long process of filling every tank I had. The depot's automated system still worked, credit card reader and pumps running off their own generators. I maxed out my company card loading diesel, watching the gallons tick up while monitoring the radio for any coherent information. Nothing good. Emergency broadcasts looping the same instructions. Stay indoors, avoid contact, wait for military assistance. But the military channels I could pick up told a different story. Units were pulling back. Quarantine zones had failed. The infection was spreading exponentially, and every estimate said the city would be completely overrun within 48 hours. I climbed up onto my assembled train and really looked at what I'd built. 12 cars total pulled by the most reliable locomotive in the fleet. Engine 2401, a 4,400 horsepower beast that could pull twice this weight without straining. At the front, the military flat cars with their mysterious cargo, then the box cars for storage. The 3-passenger cars would become living quarters, the maintenance car with its crane, the grain hoppers for water, the refrigerated unit for food storage. At the rear, I coupled on one more addition, a caboose I found rusting on a siding, old style with a cupola on top that would give me a 360 view. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine, a mobile fortress on rails. By noon, the fence had failed on the north side. I watched from 2401's cab as they poured through, hundreds of them, spreading across the yard like a flood. They swarmed the office building, the dispatch tower, every structure, breaking windows and tearing through doors. Some of them figured out how to climb the idle locomotives, pounding on the cabs, but couldn't get inside. Others wandered between the parked rail cars, attracted by their own reflections in the steel sides. I was sitting on track 27, fully fueled, fully assembled, watching my old life get torn apart. The rational move was to leave, take my fortress train out onto the main line, and put miles between me and this chaos. But something made me wait. The radio. Voices still coming through, faint and desperate. People trapped in the residential tower 6 blocks south. A group held up in the truck stop at the Eastern Junction. Survivors at the medical clinic near Station 3. Station 3 was 8 miles down the main line, just inside the city limits. Easy run on clear track. The tower was unreachable by rail, but the truck stop sat right next to an old siding we used for overflow storage. If people were alive out there, I had the only vehicle in the city that could move without using roads, without getting stuck in traffic or blocked by barricades. I made my decision at 1:15 p.m. when I heard a kid's voice on the radio, no more than 10 years old, trying to sound brave, asking if anyone could help. His dad was hurt. They were in a signal house at mile marker 47, surrounded, running out of water. Mile marker 47 was 12 miles west on the branch line, completely accessible by rail. I throttled up, released the brakes, and felt my fortress start to move. 12 cars and 250 tons rolling forward, picking up speed, heading for the mainline junction. Behind me, the switching yard fell away, overrun and lost. Ahead, the tracks stretched out silver in the sunlight, leading into unknown territory. The first rescue run taught me everything I needed to know about survival in the new world. The main line out of the city was clear until mile marker 12, where an automobile had tried to cross the tracks and gotten stuck. I couldn't stop. Too much weight, too much momentum. So I hit it at 30 miles per hour and felt the slight bump as 2401's cowcatcher did its job. The car spun away, and we kept rolling. Mile marker 15 showed me why the military was pulling back. The track ran through what used to be a commercial district, and both sides of the rail corridor were packed with them, thousands. They rushed the train as we passed, throwing themselves at the moving cars, bouncing off steel sides, falling under the wheels. The sound was horrible. Impacts and wet crunching and that screaming. I kept my speed steady, watching them swarm, and understood that we couldn't stop. Not here, not anywhere near population centers. The signal house at mile marker 47 sat elevated beside the track, accessible by a metal stairway. I approached slowly, horn blaring, and saw movement in the window. A man's face, then the kids, both looking like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. I stopped the train with my maintenance car directly below their position, scrambled back through the passenger cars, and deployed the crane. Never used it for a rescue before, but the principle was simple. Lower the hook, let them secure themselves, raise them up. The dad came down first, moving stiff, one arm wrapped tight with a bloody bandage. Not bit, he insisted as I pulled him through the maintenance car door. Cut on broken glass. The kid followed, clutching a backpack and a baseball bat. They were the first people I'd seen in 12 hours who still had human eyes. "You're alone?" the dad asked, looking at my train. "Running this whole thing solo?" "Was alone," I said. "Got a crew now." "You know anything about locomotives?" He shook his head, but the kid piped up. "My friend's dad works for the railroad. He's at Station 3 in the medical place." "Are we going there?" "Station 3, where this whole rescue circuit had started in my mind." I nodded. "Everyone who's still alive needs to get off the ground. Rails are the only safe corridors left." The medical clinic had been fortified by some smart thinking with steel shutters and welded doors, but they were out of supplies and down to rainwater they'd collected on the roof. One of them was Marcus Webb, a signal engineer I'd worked with for 15 years. He took one look at my Fortress train and started laughing, that slightly hysterical edge that comes from too much stress and too little sleep. "Only you would think to weaponize a train, David," he said. "Only you. If you've ever had to rebuild everything you knew from scratch while the world burned around you, you know why I couldn't stop now. Drop a comment about what you'd have done differently, because the decisions got harder from here." Marcus brought crucial knowledge. He knew the entire regional rail network, every siding, every branch line, every automated switch. Between his expertise and my operational experience, we could navigate thousands of miles of track without relying on dispatch systems that no longer functioned. The others brought skills too. A paramedic, a welder, two guys who'd done construction, a woman who'd been a logistics coordinator at the port, the kid's dad who turned out to be a mechanical engineer, and two younger men who were just strong and willing to learn. We spent the rest of the first day converting the passenger cars into livable space. The cars still had most of their seat frames bolted to the floor, so we ripped those out, creating open layouts we could partition with welded steel panels from the boxcars. The maintenance car became our workshop, one of the grain hoppers we cleaned out and rigged, with collection tarps for rainwater. The refrigerated car got connected to 2401's power supply, giving us food storage that would actually work. The military flat cars stayed under their tarps. I'd peeked underneath and found exactly what I'd hoped: crates of equipment, some marked as generators, others as communication gear, and several that were definitely weapons. We'd inventory that later, when we weren't being watched by dead eyes from every overpass. By nightfall, we'd established a routine that would define the next 7 months. One person in the locomotive cab at all times, monitoring radio and keeping watch. 2 people in the caboose cupola scanning our 6. Everyone else rotating between fortification work, supply inventory, and rest. We kept the train moving slowly on secondary lines, avoiding cities, looping through rural territories where the population density kept the creature numbers manageable. Week 1, we picked up 18 more survivors from small-town stations along the branch lines. A farmer and his 2 sons from a grain depot at mile marker 89. A family of 4 hiding in a water tower accessible only by rail. 3 railroad workers who'd had the same idea I did but lacked a functioning locomotive. They'd holed up in a stationary boxcar and were slowly starving. Each rescue taught us something new about operating in this world. Speed was safety. Never stop near buildings. Use the horn to draw them out before approaching. Always have an escape route calculated. Week 2, we nearly lost everything. A group of about 40 survivors had taken over a junction station at the crossing point of 3 major lines. We approached slowly, saw people waving from the platform, heard them calling on the radio about how they'd secured the area and had supplies to trade. Marcus was immediately suspicious. The junction was too valuable, too strategic. But we had a kid on board with an infected cut who needed antibiotics, and they claimed to have medical supplies. We stopped 200 yards short, and I walked up alone carrying nothing but a radio. The leader was a man named Carson, maybe 50, with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wanted our train. Said they'd been waiting for something like it to come along, something mobile and fortified. Said we could join them, but the train would be community property under community leadership. When I declined and started walking back, his people raised guns. I hit the radio. Marcus, forward, full throttle. 250 tons of steel accelerated toward the junction while I sprinted sideways off the tracks and rolled down an embankment. The people on the platform scattered as 2401 bore down on them, horn blaring. Carson dove clear, screaming about how we'd regret this, but his people were too busy running to give chase. Marcus throttled past without stopping, and I ran alongside until someone, the welder, his name was Jake, threw open a boxcar door and hauled me inside while we were doing 20 miles per hour. We didn't go back to that junction, added it to our mental map of hostile territories, places to avoid. But the incident taught us that humans could be just as dangerous as the infected, and sometimes more so because they could plan and coordinate. We added lookouts, established protocols for approaching any survivor situation, and opened one of the weapons crates from the military flat cars. Turned out to be mostly rifles and ammunition, nothing exotic, but enough to defend ourselves if it came to that. Week 3, our population hit 37 people, and we had to add more passenger cars. Found a commuter train sitting on a siding near an abandoned suburb, coupled on 4 more cars, and suddenly we were running a genuine community on rails. The logistics coordinator, her name was Angela, started organizing people into crews, supply team, maintenance team, defense team, medical team, kitchen crew for the 1-passenger car we'd converted into a communal space with a propane cooking setup. The kid with the baseball bat, turned out his name was Oliver, appointed himself my assistant, and spent every spare moment in the locomotive cab, learning the controls. He picked up the basics scary fast: throttle, brake, horn, the relationship between air pressure and stopping distance. His dad, whose name was Raymond, helped Marcus work out our routing system. We started running a circuit, a 2-week loop through rural territories, hitting small towns where we knew there were survivors, stopping at pre-scouted supply locations, always moving, never staying in one place long enough to become a target. Month 2 started with our first death, not from infection, from stupidity. One of the younger guys, Mike, 23, thought he was invincible, jumped off the train while we were moving to grab supplies from a trackside warehouse, rolled wrong, broke his leg, and started screaming. We stopped, which was a mistake. The screaming drew them from the nearby woods, a pack of maybe 20, and by the time we got Mike back on board, he'd been scratched by one of them. The paramedic, whose name was Lisa, isolated him in one of the boxcars. He turned in 37 minutes. We heard him changing. The sounds that came from that boxcar weren't human anymore. I had to be the one to handle it. Walked in there with one of the rifles while everyone else sealed the door behind me. The thing that used to be Mike came at me without hesitation, and I put 2 rounds through its skull. First time I'd killed anything that had a name I knew. Wouldn't be the last. We added another rule: No solo excursions. No unnecessary risks. The train was life. Everything outside the train was death waiting to happen. But we kept rescuing people because that's what separated us from groups like Carson's. By month 3, we had 62 people living on what had grown to 23 cars. We'd added boxcars for storage, more passenger cars for living space, a second maintenance car for our expanding workshop, and even found a dining car from an old luxury line that we converted into a proper communal area. The train had become a mobile town, chugging along at 20 to 30 miles per hour, running our circuit, stopping only for supplies and fuel. Fuel was becoming the critical issue. We'd hit every railroad fuel depot within 300 miles, and most were either dry or contaminated. The locomotives were efficient, but running a train this size required about 200 gallons of diesel per day, and we were burning through our reserves. Marcus and Raymond worked out calculations that gave us maybe 3 more months before we'd have to find a solution, or start abandoning cars. Then we found the refinery. Mile marker 203 on the Western Branch line ran past an old biodiesel plant that had been producing fuel from agricultural waste. The place was fenced, isolated, and, most importantly, had its own rail siding for tanker cars. We approached carefully, sent a drone up that one of the military crates had contained, and saw that the facility looked intact but abandoned. No movement, no infected visible, and sitting on the siding were 4 tanker cars, each with the capacity of 30,000 gallons. We spent 2 days securing that facility, clearing the buildings room by room, establishing a perimeter. Found 7 survivors living in the administrative building, workers who'd been trapped when everything collapsed and had managed to keep the facility partially operational. They'd been producing small batches of biodiesel from stored materials, rationing it, waiting for rescue that never came. When we rolled up in our fortress train, they thought we were military. Better than military, Marcus told them. We're mobile, self-sufficient, and we're not pulling back. You want to keep making fuel? We'll keep you safe and supplied. Deal? They joined us, but we left a crew of 5 at the facility, rotating people in and out every 2 weeks. The refinery became our primary base, the one fixed point in our circuit. We could produce about 500 gallons of biodiesel per week with the materials on hand, and the workers taught our people how to operate the equipment. Suddenly, our fuel crisis was solved, as long as we could keep the refinery secure and supplied with raw materials. Month 4 brought winter and new challenges. The creatures didn't care about cold. They kept moving in temperatures that should have killed them, their bodies shutting down everything non-essential to just keep hunting. But the train cared about cold. Water lines froze. Heating systems struggled. We burned through propane trying to keep the living cars warm while also maintaining visibility through the locomotive's windows. We adapted, found a rail yard with a snowplow attachment, and mounted it on 2401's front, insulated the passenger cars with materials scavenged from abandoned homes near the tracks, set up a wood-burning stove in the dining car that someone had pulled from a rural station house. The train became a moving survival bubble, rolling through frozen landscapes where the dead were the only things that still moved with purpose. We also started seeing patterns in their behavior. They congregated around areas where they'd last seen humans, sometimes waiting for weeks. They responded to sound more than sight, which meant we could pass through areas if we kept quiet and didn't use the horn. And they avoided water, not consciously, but their coordination broke down when crossing streams or rivers, and many of them just stood at the edge, confused by the barrier. Marcus and I worked out new routes that took us across long bridges and through territories where the rail lines followed rivers. Safer corridors, fewer encounters, less ammunition expended. We were learning to read the landscape of the apocalypse. This is where everything I thought I knew about survival got tested. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button and share this, because what happened in month 5 will show you just how wrong I was about who the real enemy was. Month 5, we encountered another train. We were running the Eastern Circuit, moving through farmland about 40 miles from the nearest city, when Marcus spotted it on a parallel track 2 miles ahead. Another locomotive pulling what looked like a dozen cars, moving south while we were heading north. I slowed down, cautious, and tried the radio. Got static, then a voice. Male, careful. Identify yourself. Railroad engineer David Mills operating a survivor train out of the Great Northern Yard. You. Pause. Jacob Torres, formerly of Southern Rail. How many people you carrying? 68. We'd picked up 6 more the previous week. You? 43. You friendly? I looked at Marcus, who shrugged. Friendly enough? Looking to trade information? We met at a neutral junction, where 2 lines crossed but didn't connect, parking our trains parallel, 50 yards apart. Torres was younger than me, maybe 40, with the lean look of someone who'd been burning calories faster than replacing them. His train was smaller, but more heavily fortified, steel plates welded over windows, observation posts mounted on the roofs, what looked like mounted guns at both ends. You've seen combat, I said, 3 times. Organized groups trying to take the train. Lost 11 people. He looked at my fortress, noting the military flat cars the size of our setup. You've been luckier or smarter. Both, maybe. We had 1 close call early on, been avoiding conflicts since. We spent 3 hours sharing information, routes, resource locations, hostile territories, behavioral patterns of the infected. Torres's group had been doing the same circuit strategy but farther south, and between us we mapped out nearly 1,000 miles of track. He told us about a survivor encampment at a major rail hub 200 miles east. Maybe 300 people living in converted rail cars, trying to establish something permanent. Said they were calling themselves New Junction and were looking to coordinate with other mobile groups. Safety in numbers, Torres said. Multiple trains, coordinated movements, shared resources. Could actually build something instead of just surviving. It was tempting. The idea of being part of something larger, having backup, not being alone on the rails. But I thought about Carson's group at the junction station, how quickly community resources became someone else's control. Marcus saw the same concern on my face. We'll think about it, I told Torres. Stay in radio contact, share intelligence, maybe coordinate on supply runs. He nodded, understanding. The offer stands. World's getting smaller and more dangerous. Eventually, independent operators won't be viable. We parted ways, and I spent the next week thinking about what he'd said. Was I being paranoid or prudent? Our train worked because we had a clear structure. I made final decisions. Marcus handled routing, Angela managed resources, and everyone else had defined roles. We were small enough to be flexible, large enough to handle most threats. But Torres was right that things were getting harder. Fuel was manageable now, but what about when the refinery ran out of raw materials? Food was okay because we hit farming communities, but winter was killing crops and stored supplies were running low everywhere. By month 6, we'd expanded our circuit to include 3 fixed bases beyond the refinery, a farming community where we'd helped secure a grain storage facility in exchange for a share of the stores. a small-town medical clinic where Lisa had trained locals to manufacture basic medicines from available materials, and a machine shop where our people and the locals collaborated on maintaining equipment. We were building a network, not just surviving. But the infected were evolving, not biologically. They were still the same dead-eyed predators, but behaviorally, they were starting to pack hunt, moving in coordinated groups that seemed to have basic communication. We'd see scout individuals moving ahead of larger packs, leading them towards sounds or movement. They were learning, or whatever passed for learning in their degraded brains was optimizing them for hunting. One pack surrounded our train while we were stopped at a supply depot. And they didn't just swarm randomly. They hit us from multiple sides simultaneously, climbing on the cars, trying doors and windows systematically, working together to rock a passenger car hard enough that we thought it might derail. We had to fire up the locomotive and move while people were still outside loading supplies. Left behind 30 cases of canned goods and nearly left behind 2 people who had to sprint and jump onto a moving flat car. After that, we stopped stopping. Developed a technique where we'd slow to 5 miles per hour and have people jump off with supply carts, gather what we needed in 10-minute sprints, then jump back on while we were still rolling. Dangerous, but less dangerous than being stationary. Month 7 started with a choice that would define everything that followed. The military broadcast came through on an emergency frequency. A coalition of remaining government forces was establishing a permanent secure zone in a mountainous region 300 miles northwest. They had power, agriculture, manufacturing, and they were calling all survivors to relocate. Coordinates, route markers, promises of safety and rebuilding civilization. Most of my people wanted to go. They were tired of moving, tired of the fear, tired of living on a train. They wanted walls and permanence and the illusion of the old world. I understood that. But something about the broadcast felt wrong to me. The coordinates they gave were in a valley. Good for defense, maybe, but also a trap if things went bad. And the route they suggested meant abandoning the rails for the last 100 miles, traveling by road through territories we hadn't scouted. It could be legitimate, Angela argued during the meeting we held in the dining car. Everyone was there. All 68 people crammed in, voting on our future. This might be our only chance to stop running. Or it's a concentration camp, Marcus countered. Round up survivors, control them, use them for labor or worse. We don't know who's running this coalition or what their agenda is. The vote was close. 39 wanted to go, 29 wanted to stay on the circuit. I had the deciding voice as the train's engineer, the one who physically controlled our movement. I looked at Oliver, sitting with his dad, the kid who'd learned to run a locomotive over the past 7 months. He'd been 11 when I picked him up at mile marker 47. He was different now, harder, quieter, but also more capable. He'd killed infected. He'd made life or death decisions during supply runs. He'd grown up in this apocalypse. "What do you think?" I asked him. He didn't hesitate. "The train works. Why fix what isn't broken?" Out of the mouths of children comes either wisdom or ignorance, and I chose to believe it was wisdom. "We're not going," I announced. "But anyone who wants to can leave. We'll take you as close as we safely can, supply you for the journey, and wish you well. This train remains independent and mobile." 19 people left us at the closest point to the government coordinates, supplies, weapons, maps, and genuine good wishes. I watched them walk away from the tracks toward an uncertain future and wondered if I'd made the right call. The 49 who stayed seemed more committed, more unified. We'd shed the people who wanted something we couldn't provide, and what remained was a crew that believed in the mobile fortress concept. We heard the screaming on the radio 3 weeks later, frantic broadcasts from the government zone. The secure perimeter had failed. The valley was overrun. Thousands dead. Evacuation impossible. Then silence. I tried not to think about the 19 people we'd sent that direction. Tried to focus on the 49 who'd stayed. On Oliver learning advanced locomotive operations. On our network of supply bases and allied communities. On the fact that we were still alive and moving while the world continued to collapse. Torres contacted us again in late month 7. His train had taken heavy losses, down to 23 people after an ambush by a hostile group that had used explosives to derail 2 of his cars. He wanted to merge operations, combine trains, pool resources. Said he couldn't maintain independent operations anymore with so few people. We met at the same neutral junction. His train looked beaten. Bullet holes, makeshift repairs, sections of armor torn away. The people I could see through the windows looked exhausted and scared. Torres himself had aged 10 years in the 2 months since I'd seen him. I'm asking, David. We need this. I looked at Marcus, at Angela, at the faces of my crew watching from our train. We'd built something that worked through discipline, coordination. Adding Torres people meant doubling our size, stretching our resources, integrating people we didn't know and hadn't vetted. But it also meant skilled railroad people, additional knowledge, and the simple moral imperative of helping those who needed it. We do this on our terms, I said finally. Our structure, our command, our rules. You and your people join our operation, not the other way around. Clear? Torres nodded without hesitation. Whatever keeps us alive. We spent 2 days coupling trains together, integrating systems, assigning Torres's people to crews. Our population jumped to 72. Our train grew to 38 cars, and our fuel consumption became a genuine concern again. But we also gained a second locomotive engineer, 3 more people with weapons training, and a communications specialist who got our radio systems working better than they ever had. The combined train, now officially too big to run on some branch lines, began operating on a modified circuit that stuck to main lines and major junctions. We became more visible, more of a presence, and that attracted both survivors and threats. Week 1 of the combined operation, we picked up 11 more people and had to fight off 2 separate attacks from hostile groups that wanted to take what we'd built. The train was becoming legend in the scattered survivor communities. The fortress on rails, the mobile sanctuary, the last functioning piece of the old transportation infrastructure. People talked about us on the radio, spread rumors about our capabilities, and increasingly looked to us as a symbol that organization and civilization could still exist. By the end of month 7, we were running 41 cars with 86 people, operating 3 fixed bases, plus the refinery, coordinating with 17 different survivor communities along our circuit, and serving as a mobile supply chain that kept small towns alive. We'd become something more than a survival group. We'd become infrastructure. I stood in 2401's cab one evening, watching the sun set over frozen farmland while we rolled west at 25 miles per hour, and realized that we'd done more than survive. We'd adapted. We'd built a new kind of community for a new kind of world, one that never stopped moving, that lived on steel rails stretching across dead lands, that represented continuity and connection in a fractured reality. Oliver was in the cab with me, hands on the secondary controls, learning the feel of the train at different speeds. How long do we keep doing this? He asked, not complaining, just curious. Moving forever? Until we can't anymore, I said. Until the fuel runs out, or the tracks fail, or we find something better. But right now, this works. The train works. He nodded, satisfied with that answer, and I realized that was the truth of our existence. We weren't trying to rebuild the old world or create some new utopia. We were just maintaining motion, keeping the wheels turning, surviving 1 mile at a time. Maybe that was enough. Maybe in a world where everything had stopped, just keeping moving was its own victory. If this story of building something mobile and defiant in a world gone dead resonated with you, share it with someone who understands what it means to keep moving when everything says to give up. We made it 7 months. We'll make it 70 more. Month 8 brought snow that never seemed to stop, and a radio transmission that changed everything. We were running the northern segment of our circuit, moving through territories we'd cleared a dozen times, when the communications specialist, his name was Derek, one of Torres's people, picked up a coded military signal. Not the usual emergency broadcasts or desperate civilian calls, but something structured, repeated on a precise schedule, using encryption patterns he recognized from his time in the Army Reserve. Someone's coordinating large-scale operations, Derek said, headphones pressed tight to his ears, scribbling notes, multiple units, grid references, supply chain logistics. This isn't scattered survivors. This is organized military. And they're talking about rail corridors. I felt my stomach drop. We'd been operating independently for 7 months, flying under the radar, avoiding anything that looked like official authority, because authority meant control, and control meant losing the autonomy that kept us alive. Can you determine their position? They reference Point Ironside repeatedly. Cross-checking with rail maps and military installations in the region, he pulled up Marcus's annotated charts. Here, Fort Davidson, 200 miles northeast. Major Army base. Sits right at the junction of 3 main rail lines. Torres, who'd been standing watch, turned from the window. If they're operational and coordinating, they might have resources. Medical supplies we can't manufacture. Ammunition, maybe even intelligence about what's happening nationally. Or they might want to conscript our train, I countered. Military loves logistics assets, and we're the biggest mobile supply platform left in the region. We roll into their base, we might not roll back out. Angela joined the discussion, bringing the pragmatic perspective she always provided. We're at 86 people now. 17 of them are under 18. 5 are over 60. We have pregnant women, chronic medical conditions, and we're burning through our antibiotic stockpile. If Fort Davidson has real medical facilities, she didn't need to finish. 3 days earlier, one of the farming community contacts had died from an infected wound that antibiotics could have prevented. Lisa had done everything possible with what we had, but sometimes nothing wasn't enough. The death had shaken everyone because it highlighted our vulnerability, not to the infected, but to the basic medical crises that the old world had made routine. I looked around the locomotive cab at the faces of my leadership crew: Marcus, Angela, Torres, Derek, Lisa, who'd climbed up to join the discussion, and Oliver, always there, always listening. We do reconnaissance first. Derek, can you respond to their signal without revealing our position? I can try general broadcast, identify as survivors, request information, see how they respond before committing to anything. Do it, cautious. No specifics about our capabilities or location. until we know what we're dealing with. Professional, careful, exactly what I'd have said if I were trying to lure in resources without scaring them off. Fort Davidson was operational with approximately 800 military personnel and 2,000 civilian survivors. They'd secured a 20-mile perimeter, had functioning power and agriculture, and were attempting to coordinate regional stabilization efforts. They welcomed contact with survivor groups and offered trade, medical assistance, and mutual defense coordination. No mention of conscription or mandatory integration. Too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But desperation makes fools of us all, and we were desperate for medical supplies. We arranged a meeting point, a rail junction 15 miles from Fort Davidson, where we could maintain escape routes in 3 directions. Neutral ground. Both parties would send small delegations, unarmed, to discuss potential cooperation. I took Marcus, Angela, and Lisa. Left Torres in command of the train with strict orders. If we weren't back in 6 hours or if anything seemed wrong, get the train moving and don't look back. We rode one of the small maintenance vehicles we'd modified to run on rails. Basically a motorized cart that could make 20 miles in 30 minutes, fast enough to retreat if needed. The Army delegation was already waiting when we arrived. 3 soldiers in clean uniforms that looked bizarre after months of seeing only survival wear, and a civilian administrator who introduced herself as Colonel Patricia Vance. She looked competent, tired, and genuinely pleased to see us. Engineer Mills, your reputation precedes you. The mobile fortress train. We've heard reports from at least a dozen communities about your supply runs and rescue operations. She gestured to the soldiers. These are Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Chen, and Sergeant Hakim. We're here to discuss mutually beneficial cooperation. We're independent operators, I said immediately, establishing boundaries. We're not looking to integrate with military command structures or surrender operational control of our assets. Vance nodded like she'd expected exactly that response. Understood and respected. We're not interested in conscription or seizure. Frankly, we need your train to keep doing exactly what it's been doing, maintaining connections between survivor communities, running supplies, providing mobile rescue capability. What we can offer in exchange is access to our medical facilities, manufacturing capacity, intelligence about infected movement patterns, and ammunition resupply. In exchange for what specifically? Coordination. Share your route information so we know which areas you're covering, and we're not duplicating efforts. Relay intelligence back to us about conditions in territories outside our perimeter. If you encounter survivor groups too large for you to transport, direct them to Fort Davidson. And if we need emergency cargo moved quickly to outlying communities, we'd like the option to contract your services. It sounded reasonable, which made me suspicious. 7 months in the apocalypse had taught me that reasonable offers usually had hidden costs. We'd need to see your facilities, verify your capabilities before committing to anything. Of course, we've prepared quarters for your entire leadership team. Tour the base, meet our medical staff, inspect our manufacturing operations, and make an informed decision. Your train can remain at the junction under your crew's control. Marcus caught my eye, his expression conveying the same caution I felt. But Lisa was focused on the medical possibilities, and Angela was clearly calculating the resource benefits. We agreed to a 3-day assessment period, with daily check-ins with Taurus to confirm we hadn't been detained. Fort Davidson turned out to be exactly what Vance had described. Functional military operation combined with civilian refugee management. The medical facilities were pre-apocalypse quality. Sterile environments, functioning diagnostic equipment running on generator power, pharmacy stockpiles that made Lisa actually tear up. The manufacturing wing was producing ammunition, basic medications, and biodiesel from a process more efficient than our refinery. The agricultural operations were underground hydroponics, growing fresh vegetables year-round. How? I asked Vance during the tour. How did you manage to secure all this when every other military installation we've heard about fell or was abandoned? Geography, preparation, and ruthless early decision-making, she said bluntly. Fort Davidson sits on high ground with natural barriers and limited approach routes. When the outbreak started, the base commander recognized the threat immediately and locked down before infection could spread internally. We had soldiers shoot their own family members trying to get through the gates in those first days. Hard choices that still haunt us, but they kept the core facility secure. The civilian areas were less impressive. Overcrowded converted barracks, rationed meals, strict schedules that felt more like imprisonment than safety. The people looked fed and healthy, but there was a deadness in their eyes that our train residents didn't have. They'd traded freedom for security and were slowly realizing the price. On day 2, Morrison took me to the intelligence center where they tracked infected movements using drone surveillance and reports from outlying observation posts. The maps showed patterns we'd suspected but couldn't confirm. Massive herds of infected migrating between urban centers following seasonal patterns like animals. The cities were completely overrun, functionally uninhabitable, but rural areas showed clearing patterns where the infected population was actually declining. We think they're starving, Morrison explained. Not in the traditional sense, but their metabolisms are burning out. Average infected survives about 18 months post-transformation before major system failure. The early waves from 8 months ago are starting to drop. In another year, the population density might decrease enough for reclamation operations. You're planning to take back territory? Right now, we're focused on sustainability and coordination. That's where your train becomes crucial. You're mobile. You can reach communities we can't, and you've built trust through action. We want to support that, not control it. It sounded good, almost too good. But over 3 days of observation, I couldn't find the trap. Vance's people were genuinely trying to rebuild functional society, and they recognized that our independent operation served purposes their military structure couldn't. On day 3, we negotiated terms. We'd maintain our independent operation but coordinate routing with Fort Davidson. They'd provide medical resupply, ammunition, and intelligence. We'd relay information about outlying communities and provide emergency transport services when requested and feasible. No conscription, no asset seizure. Partners, not subordinates. We returned to the train with enough antibiotics to last 6 months, ammunition crates, fresh vegetables that people literally cried over, and detailed intelligence maps. Torres met me in the locomotive cab while everyone else was celebrating the supplies. "You trust them?" he asked quietly. "I trust that our interests align for now. Davidson needs us mobile and effective. We need their resources, but I don't trust any organization enough to get comfortable. We maintain our independence, our mobility, and our escape plans." He nodded, satisfied. Good, because comfortable is how you die. They identified 12 survivor communities within our circuit range that we hadn't known about. Small groups, 20 to 50 people each, hanging on in isolated locations. We integrated them into our supply runs, and 8 of them sent representatives to join our train. Our population hit 106. Our train grew to 47 cars, and we split operations into 2 separate trains to maintain maneuverability. Torres took command of the second train, 14 cars, 38 people, operating a parallel circuit that intersected with ours at 3 points. We coordinated by radio, shared intelligence, and effectively doubled our coverage area. The mobile fortress concept was proving scalable, but success attracted attention. Month 10 brought the raiders. They hit Torres's train first, choosing a moment when he'd stop to assist a stranded survivor group. Professional operation, explosives on the tracks ahead and behind to trap the train, then armed assault from both sides. Torres's people fought back, but the raiders had numbers and military-grade weapons. They captured 6 cars before Torres managed to decouple and escape with the locomotive and remaining cars. 8 people dead, 14 captured, and thousands of pounds of supplies stolen. The radio call came through at 2 a.m. Torres's voice, strained and furious, reporting the attack. They knew our route, knew our schedule, knew exactly where we'd be vulnerable. David, we have a leak. My blood went cold. Our network included 19 fixed communities, plus Fort Davidson coordination. Any of them could have passed information intentionally, or let it slip accidentally. Or the raiders had their own intelligence operation, tracking us through radio intercepts or drone surveillance. Fall back to Point Echo, I said, referencing one of our secure meeting locations. We'll coordinate response. We met 18 hours later at a junction deep in rural territory. Torres's train looked wounded, bullet holes, fire damage, missing cars. The people who'd survived looked shaken in ways that months of infected attacks hadn't achieved. Humans attacking humans with purpose and planning was different. More violating. They're organized, Torres said during the emergency council. Military tactics, disciplined fire teams, communication equipment. This wasn't random raiders. This was a force that's been operating with purpose. Derek had been monitoring radio frequencies and found chatter that confirmed Torres's assessment. They call themselves the Reclamation Front. At least 300 members, maybe more, operating out of a consolidated territory about 80 miles south. Their ideology is basically might makes right survivalism. They view supplies and resources as belonging to whoever can take them, and they see our train operations as theft from common territory. They're bandits with a philosophy, Angela said flatly, and they just declared war on us. I looked at the maps, calculating. The Reclamation Front's territory overlapped with the southern section of our circuit. 6 of our allied communities were within their operational range. If they'd hit Torres once, they'd hit us again, and next time they'd be ready for armed resistance. We have options, I said slowly. Pull back, abandon the southern circuit, consolidate our operations in the northern territories. We'd lose access to some resources but eliminate the threat. And abandon 6 communities to raiders, Lisa interjected. People who've relied on us, who've fed us and sheltered our people. We just leave them? Or we fight, Torres said. Coordinate with Davidson, bring military support, and clear the Reclamation Front from the region. That option felt wrong immediately. The moment we invited military force into our operations, we'd lose the independence that made our model work. We'd become an auxiliary to Davidson's objectives instead of our own operation. And military action meant casualties, both ours and theirs. The raiders were humans, twisted by the apocalypse, but still human. I'd killed infected without hesitation, but turning our trains into military strike forces was a line I wasn't ready to cross. Third option, I said. We changed tactics. No more predictable routes, no more scheduled stops. We operate random patterns, maintain radio silence except for encrypted bursts, and hit supply points in unpredictable sequences. Make ourselves impossible to ambush. That destabilizes our entire network, Angela protested. The communities rely on our regular runs. If we go random, we can't coordinate effectively. Better unstable than captured, Torres countered. David's right. We've been operating like it's peacetime. Maintaining schedules and routes like this was still the old world. Time to adapt. We spent 3 days completely reorganizing our operations. Developed a rotating cipher system for radio coordination so even intercepted communications would be useless. Mapped out 47 different route variations through our circuit territory. Randomized daily. Established covert supply caches at unmarked locations instead of fixed community bases. And most critically, we armed up. Opened every weapons crate from the military flat cars and trained every adult on basic combat tactics. The mobile fortress became a warship. Month 11, the reclamation front hit us twice and failed both times. First attempt, they set up an ambush at a junction we'd used 5 times before, but we took a completely different route and bypassed them entirely. Second attempt, they tracked us through drone surveillance and launched an assault while we were moving, but our new defensive positions and concentrated firepower drove them off with heavy losses. They lost 11 fighters. We lost none. But the constant vigilance was exhausting. People couldn't relax, couldn't feel safe even on the train. The children had nightmares about humans attacking instead of infected. Oliver, who'd been training to take over engineer duties, started carrying a rifle constantly and jumping at unexpected sounds. We were winning tactically, but losing psychologically. The infected were predictable, but humans weren't, and that changed everything about what survival meant. Comment below if you've ever had to defend something you built from people who wanted to take it, because this is where the cost of civilization became real. Month 12, Fort Davidson made an offer I couldn't refuse. Vance called a face-to-face meeting and laid out a coordinated operation to eliminate the reclamation front. Combined force, Davidson military providing heavy weapons and tactical support, our trains providing mobility and logistics, allied communities providing intelligence and safe houses. 3-week operation to systematically clear raiders from the southern territories and restore safe corridor operations. I'm not turning my train into a military vehicle, I said immediately. You already have, Vance replied, not unkindly. The moment you armed your people and fought back, you became combatants. The only question now is whether you fight smart with support or keep struggling alone until attrition wears you down. She wasn't wrong. We'd lost 2 people in the past month, not to raiders directly, but to accidents that happened because everyone was stretched too thin, running on fear and adrenaline. Marcus had developed a stress ulcer. Angela was rationing her blood pressure medication. Torres openly talked about abandoning operations and finding some isolated place to hole up permanently. The status quo wasn't sustainable. What's the operational plan? I asked. The plan was elegant and ruthless. Davidson would insert special operations teams into reclamation front territory to gather intelligence and identify leadership. Our trains would run precisely calculated routes to draw raider attention and force them into prepared kill zones. Allied communities would provide shelter and surveillance. Over 3 weeks, we'd systematically dismantle their organization, capturing leadership, destroying supply caches, and demonstrating that organized resistance was futile. It worked. Week 1. We identified the Reclamation Front's command structure. a former National Guard officer named Briggs, who'd convinced 300 survivors that strength equaled survival. Week 2, Davidson teams captured Briggs and 15 senior leaders during a raid on their headquarters. Week 3, we ran supply operations openly, daring the remaining raiders to attack, and watched their organization collapse as lower-level members either surrendered or fled. By the end of month 12, the Southern Circuit was secure. The cost was 47 raiders dead, 33 captured, and the remainder scattered. On our side, we lost 4 Davidson soldiers and one of our train crew, a young man named Seth who'd volunteered for a scouting run and got caught in crossfire. His death hurt more than any of the previous losses because it was preventable. If we'd stayed independent, stayed mobile, never engaged in open conflict, Seth would still be alive. I stood at his memorial service. We'd started doing actual services for our dead, marking graves along the rail lines, and wondered if we'd made the right choices. We'd secured our territory and saved our network, but at the cost of becoming what we'd tried to avoid, a military force operating under coordinated command structure. The line between self-defense and aggression was thinner than I'd thought. Oliver approached me after the service, rifle slung over his shoulder, looking older than his 12 years. "Was it worth it?" he asked, not challenging, just genuinely trying to understand. "Ask me in a year," I said. "Right now, I don't know." Month 13 brought an unexpected development. The surrender negotiations with captured Reclamation Front members revealed that many of them were just desperate survivors who'd followed Briggs because he offered structure and purpose. They weren't ideologically committed to raiding. They just needed somewhere to belong. Vance proposed integration, offer them amnesty in exchange for productive labor, either at Fort Davidson or with our train operations. The vote among our crew was contentious. Torres argued strongly against it. These people had killed our friends and attacked us repeatedly. Lisa countered that refusing them continued the cycle of violence and wasted human resources we desperately needed. Angela took the practical middle ground. Accept them provisionally. Integrate them slowly. Maintain monitoring for security. We accepted 70 former raiders into our network. 30 went to Fort Davidson. 40 joined our trains and allied communities, distributed carefully to prevent concentration of force. Every one of them understood that betrayal meant immediate expulsion into infected territory. Most of them integrated successfully, grateful for a second chance, and genuinely remorseful about their previous actions. 3 didn't. We caught them trying to sabotage our fuel supplies in month 14. Torres executed them personally, quick shots behind a maintenance building, bodies left by the tracks as a message. I didn't stop him, though I probably should have. Mercy had limits in this world, and we couldn't afford internal threats. Month 15, something remarkable happened. The infected density in our circuit territory dropped noticeably. Morrison's intelligence had been right. They were dying off, systems failing, populations declining. Areas that had been impassable 8 months earlier were now merely dangerous. Towns we'd written off as completely overrun showed signs of clearing. We started reclamation operations, small teams moving into abandoned areas, clearing remaining infected, establishing basic security, and beginning reconstruction. One of our allied communities reoccupied an entire small town, bringing population up to 300, with functioning power and agriculture. They still relied on our supply runs, but they were becoming genuinely self-sufficient. The train network expanded to include 4 separate trains running coordinated circuits. Torres commanded Train 2. A woman named Sarah, who'd been with us since month 4, took command of Train 3. A former railroad dispatcher who joined from Fort Davidson commanded Train 4. Between us, we maintained connections across 800 miles of track, serviced 42 communities, and transported over 400 people in mobile populations. We were becoming infrastructure again. Not the old world's infrastructure. That was gone forever. But something new, adapted to the reality of scattered survivors and persistent threats. The trains were the veins keeping the body alive, moving resources and people and information across territories that would otherwise be isolated. Month 18 brought my hardest decision. Oliver's dad, Raymond, was dying. Cancer that had probably been growing for years before the outbreak, now metastasizing beyond what Lisa could manage with our limited medical capabilities. Fort Davidson had better equipment, but Davidson's doctors said it was terminal. 6 months, maybe. Raymond refused to leave the train. "This is home," he said from his bed in the medical car. "You've given us more than survival, David. You've given us purpose. I'm not spending my last months behind walls waiting to die." Oliver sat with his father every day when he wasn't on engineering duty, and I watched a kid process his impending loss with a maturity that broke my heart. The apocalypse stole childhood from all of them, replaced innocence with necessity. Oliver could run a locomotive, shoot accurately, navigate complex supply chains, and lead crews on dangerous operations. He could do everything except be 12 years old. Raymond died in month 19, peacefully in his sleep, while the train rolled through farmland under a clear sky. We buried him at a junction point that had been particularly meaningful to him, where we'd first successfully outmaneuvered raiders using route randomization he'd helped plan. Oliver insisted on marking the grave with a railroad spike driven into the ground, creating a memorial that would last as long as the rails did. "He'd want to stay with the track," Oliver said quietly. "Part of the system." We had 17 graves marked along our circuit now, each one a person who'd been part of building something that outlasted them. The mobile fortress wasn't just a survival strategy. It had become a culture, a way of life that people believed in enough to die for. Month 21, Fort Davidson proposed something ambitious, expanding the train network nationally. They'd made contact with other military installations and survivor enclaves across the country, and the rail lines still stretched between them, mostly intact, waiting to be used. They wanted to coordinate a continental railroad operation, multiple independent train groups like ours, maintaining connections across thousands of miles, rebuilding trade and communication networks. "We'd be the model," Vance explained during planning meetings. "Your operation demonstrates viability. Your survival manual and standard operating procedures would become the template for other groups. You'd train new engineers, help establish operations in other regions, and coordinate through a centralized intelligence network." "That sounds like government," I said carefully. "Centralized authority. The thing we specifically avoided by staying independent. Each train group maintains operational independence, but instead of 42 communities in one region, we're talking about hundreds of communities nationwide. Real reconstruction." I brought it to the crew for discussion. The debate lasted 3 days and revealed fundamental differences in how people saw our purpose. Some believed we should stay regional and focused, maintaining what we'd built rather than overextending. Others wanted to be part of something larger, to contribute to genuine national recovery. The divide wasn't about right or wrong. It was about vision and risk tolerance. The vote passed narrowly, 53 in favor of national expansion, 47 opposed. We'd participate in the Continental Railroad project, but only after establishing secure local operations that could function independently if the larger network failed. Month 24, 2 years after I first assembled cars in an overrun rail yard, I stood in 2401's cab watching Oliver take the controls for a solo run. He'd passed every engineering certification we'd developed, demonstrated judgment and skill beyond his age, and earned the crew's trust completely. At 13 years old, he was officially qualified to command a train. "Remember," I said as he prepared to decouple and run a short supply circuit with a crew of 8. "The train is never just a vehicle. It's a community, a promise, and a lifeline. You're not just moving cargo. You're maintaining connections that keep people alive." "I know," he said, hands steady on the controls. "You taught me that on day 1. I watched his train pull away. 7 cars and a locomotive. Small by our standards, but perfectly capable. The kid who'd been hiding in a signal house with his dying father now commanded mobile operations with confidence and competence. The apocalypse had taken his childhood, but it had given him purpose and identity. I couldn't decide if that was tragic or triumphant. Marcus climbed into the cab, moving slower than he used to, the stress of 2 years showing in his gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. "You think we'll actually pull off this national network?" "I think we'll try," I said. "Whether it works depends on factors we can't control, but the alternative is staying regional and watching our system stagnate. Find a good location, secure it, and just live. No more circuits, no more constant motion. Actually build something permanent." It was tempting. 2 years of never stopping, never sleeping more than 4 hours at a stretch, never letting my guard down. I was 48 years old and felt 70. My knees ached in cold weather. I had scars from a dozen close calls. I'd killed more infected and hostile humans than I could count. The weight of hundreds of lives depending on my decisions had worn grooves into my psyche that would never smooth out. But stopping felt like dying. The train worked because it moved, because it connected, because it represented something ongoing and alive in a world that had stopped. The moment we settled, we'd become just another static community, vulnerable to siege and stagnation. "Maybe someday," I told Marcus, "but not yet. Still too much track to cover. Still too many people who need what we provide." If you've made it this far through 2 years of building, fighting, losing, and adapting, then you understand what it means to keep moving forward when everything says to stop. Share this story, because it's not just about survival. It's about what we choose to become when the world forces us to rebuild everything from scratch. Month 26, we connected with the first Eastern Corridor train group. Operation running out of what used to be Pittsburgh, commanded by a woman named Chen, who'd built her operation using many of the same principles we'd developed independently. Her train serviced 31 communities across Pennsylvania and Ohio, and she'd maintained operation through 2 brutal winters and countless hostile encounters. The meeting felt historic. 2 independent train operations, proving the model worked across different regions, sharing experiences, and establishing coordination protocols. Chen's people had solved problems we'd struggled with. Better water filtration systems, more efficient food storage, improved defensive positions. We'd solved problems they faced: fuel production, medical supply chains, integration protocols for hostile survivors. Together, we mapped out coordinated routes that would connect our networks, creating a supply chain stretching from the Great Plains to the Appalachians. It was ambitious, probably insane, but also necessary. Isolated communities couldn't maintain advanced civilization. Connected communities could share resources, knowledge, and population to maintain specialization and growth. Month 30, 3 trains operated from our original group. Myself on train 1 with 62 people, Torres on train 2 with 48, and Sarah on train 3 with 54. Train 4 had been destroyed in a derailment during an ice storm in month 28. We'd lost 17 people, including its commander, and the survivors had integrated into the remaining trains. The loss reinforced that what we did was inherently dangerous, that mobile operations meant constant risk, but also that the mission continued regardless of losses. We'd connected with 4 other regional train networks by then. The Continental Railroad wasn't fully operational, but the foundation was established. Intelligence shared across 2,000 miles of territory. Supply coordination that moved critical resources from areas of surplus to areas of need. Population transfers that reunited families and redistributed specialized skills. It wasn't the old world civilization, but it was something functional emerging from the chaos. The infected population in our territory had declined by an estimated 70% from peak levels. Some areas were genuinely safe during daylight hours. You could walk outside, work in fields, let children play without constant armed guards. Towns were being reoccupied. Agriculture was expanding. Small-scale manufacturing was returning. People were having babies by choice instead of accident, planning futures that extended beyond next week. We'd done that. Not alone, not without help, but our trains had been the connective tissue that allowed it to happen. Month 36. 3 years after the outbreak, I assembled the leadership council in our headquarters car for a final discussion. We'd been debating the same question for weeks: when to transition from mobile operations to semi-permanent base establishment. The consensus was forming that we'd accomplished what needed to be accomplished with pure nomadic operations. Now, the network needed hubs, permanent secure facilities where trains could dock, undergo major maintenance, and serve as connection points for expanding operations. We're not abandoning the mobile model, I clarified during the meeting. We're evolving it. Trains still run circuits, still maintain connections, but they're based out of secure facilities instead of operating in constant motion. Crews rotate off for rest. Maintenance happens in equipped facilities instead of improvised trackside. We transition from survival mode to sustainable operations. The vote was unanimous. We'd identified 4 locations for hub establishment, including one centered on our original refinery. Construction would begin immediately using resources and labor from our allied communities. Timeline was 18 months to full operational status. Oliver, now 14 and officially my apprentice engineer, raised the question that everyone was thinking: what happens to the people who've lived on the trains for 3 years? This has been home. Home adapts, I said. 3 years ago, home was a stationary building. Then it became a moving train. Now it becomes a facility with trains that come and go. The people who need constant motion can stay with the mobile crews. Those who need stability can work at the hubs. We're big enough now to accommodate both. It was the right decision, the mature evolution of our operation. But it also felt like the end of something, like we were trading the desperate improvised beauty of our mobile fortress for bureaucratic efficiency. The train had saved us by keeping us moving. Now we were choosing to stop. We established the first hub at the refinery in month 42, a fortified facility with maintenance bays, living quarters, agricultural operations, and rail access from 4 directions. Trains docked there for 3-day cycles, undergoing maintenance and resupply before heading back out on circuit. It worked beautifully, increasing efficiency and reducing crew fatigue. It also felt sterile compared to the constant motion we'd known. I stood on the hub's observation platform one evening, watching 3 trains come and go, and realized that we'd succeeded ourselves out of existence. The apocalyptic railroad engineer maintaining civilization through mobile operations was becoming just an operations manager, coordinating schedules, essential work, but not the desperate heroic struggle that had defined the first 3 years. Marcus found me there, 2 cups of coffee in hand. Real coffee, brought in through the Continental Network from a surviving plantation in the South. Luxuries were returning to the world. Feeling nostalgic for the good old days of constant terror, he asked, handing me a cup. Something like that. This is what success looks like, and I'm not sure I know how to function in it. Oliver's ready to command independently. Torres is talking about taking a hub management position. You could run the long-haul routes, the exploration circuits, the frontier operations. Leave the established territory to new blood. It was tempting. Return to the locomotive cab, the open track, the constant motion that had defined my existence for 3 years. But I was 50 years old now, with stress damage that would never fully heal, and the responsibility of having built something that needed mature management to survive. Heroes were for emergencies. Administrators were for continuity. Maybe, I said. Ask me in another year. Month 53. 4 years and 5 months after coupling my first car in an overrun rail yard, the Continental Railroad Network officially launched. 23 independent train operations coordinating across 8,000 miles of track, servicing over 300 communities with a combined population exceeding 40,000 survivors. We moved supplies, people, and information across territories that had been isolated since the outbreak. We maintained the connections that allowed specialized communities to focus on manufacturing, or agriculture, or research, or medical services without needing complete self-sufficiency. We'd rebuilt the circulatory system of civilization. The formal celebration at Fort Davidson was surreal. Speeches and ceremonies and people treating us like we'd done something remarkable instead of just making desperate decisions that happened to work. Vance gave me a commendation, an actual military medal for civilian service, like we were still operating in the old world's framework of recognition. Oliver stood next to me during the ceremony, now taller than me, broad-shouldered and confident in ways I'd never managed. 4.5 years of apocalypse had made him into someone capable and complete, and I felt a strange pride mixed with sorrow that this was what the world had demanded of children. "What do you think comes next?" he asked during the reception afterward, both of us uncomfortable in the formal setting. "Expansion, consolidation, eventually maybe reclaiming cities, though that's decades away, building things that outlast us." I looked at him seriously. "You're going to inherit this system eventually, probably sooner than later. The people who built it are burning out, and the second generation needs to take over. I'm 15. You were 11 when you learned to run a locomotive during a zombie apocalypse. Age stopped mattering then. You're ready, or you will be soon." The ceremony concluded, and I found myself standing outside the fort's walls looking at the tracks stretching into darkness, and realized that for the first time in 4.5 years, I didn't know where I was going next. The circuit was established, the network functioned. My role as the desperate engineer holding things together through improvisation was obsolete. Torres approached, 2 glasses of something amber that definitely wasn't water. He'd aged even harder than me, nearly died twice in year 3. Lost people he loved, carried scars visible and invisible. To the mobile fortress, he said, raising his glass. Best, worst idea we ever had. To survival, I countered, and everyone who made it possible. We drank, and I tasted alcohol for the first time since the outbreak. It burned and felt like an anchor to the old world, a reminder of things we deliberately avoided for practical reasons that maybe didn't matter anymore. What's next for you? Torres asked. I don't know. First time I can say that without it being a crisis. I genuinely don't know what comes next. Then figure it out, he said. You built something impossible. Now you get to decide what to do with the rest of your life in the world you helped create. That's a privilege most people don't get. He was right. I'd survived when millions hadn't. I'd built something functional from disaster. I'd trained a generation of people who could maintain and expand what we'd started. The mobile fortress on rails had evolved into a continental network that represented genuine hope for recovery. I walked back toward the hub facility, past 3 trains being prepped for departure, their locomotives humming with ready power. Saw Oliver in one of the cabs, running pre-departure checks with the confidence of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Watched crews loading supplies, checking weapons, coordinating routes. The system worked without me now, which meant I'd succeeded completely. The tracks stretched in every direction, silver lines connecting a broken world, maintained by people who understood that civilization was about movement and connection, not just static security. We'd learned that lesson the hard way, adapted it into doctrine, and built something resilient from it. I climbed into 2401's cab, my hands finding familiar controls, and made my decision. Let others manage the established network. I'd take a small crew and run the frontier routes, the unexplored territories, the places where the map still had blank spaces. Keep doing what worked, moving, connecting, building. 1 mile of track at a time. Throttled up, felt the familiar rumble, released the brakes. The mobile fortress was rolling again, and as long as the track stretched ahead and the diesel held out, that's where I'd be. Not because I had to anymore, but because I chose to. Because motion was life, and connection was civilization. And somewhere out there on steel rails in a broken world, there were people who needed what we could provide. The fortress train rolled into darkness, headlights cutting through night, wheels singing on rails, carrying hope and supplies and the promise that someone was still moving, still connecting, still building. We'd survived. Now we'd rebuild. 1 circuit at a time, 1 community at a time, 1 mile of track at a time. The apocalypse had tried to stop the world. We'd refused to let it. And as long as trains kept rolling and engineers kept moving, the world would keep spinning forward, connected by steel and purpose, and the simple determination to never stop. This is what it looks like to build something from nothing and watch it become bigger than yourself. If this journey from desperation to hope meant something to you, share it forward. Because the real story isn't about surviving the apocalypse. It's about what we choose to build when everything forces us to start over. We kept the trains running. We kept civilization moving. And we'll keep doing it for as long as the rails stretch ahead.